Right. Good morning, everybody. I'm John Isaacs. I'm here to introduce you this. Well, Shoba's here to introduce the session. I'm just going to do a brief introduction to Newcastle Health Innovation Partners, which I guess most of you know about anyway. But thank you for joining us. Newcastle Health Innovation Partners is what it says. It's a partnership between 5 organisations, and really it's in place to catalyze excellence in healthcare, excellence in education around healthcare, and excellence in research around healthcare. And I run the research and innovation part of NHIP. One of our major pillars of interest is advanced therapies. And again, this is around commercial research, it's around academic research. And we have what we call an Advanced Therapies Satellite, which is a strategic group, which is designed to make sure we are doing the right things to harness investment, both external investment and internal investment. And you're here today to listen to one of our seminars, and these seminars are really aimed at convening a community in the widest and broadest possible sense across our partners of those who are interested in advanced therapies, again, with the hope that that can catalyze partnerships and hopefully in the longer term bring in funding. But I think you probably know all that anyway, so I'm not going to spend any more time of this hour on that. I'm just going to hand over now to Shoba, who's going to introduce our guest speaker for today. So Shoba.
Thank you, John. Michela, it's a real honor to hear your work and having some insight into what you're going to talk about. We're very excited to have you. Michela obtained her medical degree at Milan University, where she also completed her neurology residency before moving to Newcastle. She moved to Newcastle specifically to develop expertise in translational research and clinical trials. As well as having significant clinical expertise, Michela has a vast amount of experience running clinical trials in Duchenne muscular dystrophy and other neuromuscular disorders. Michela is interested in supporting improvement of care and treatment for patients with neuromuscular disorders, as well as drug development and translational research, to share the experience of DMD more widely. So we're very excited to have you, Michela, and I will give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction, and it's really my pleasure and honor to present at one of these seminars, but also to share our experience with the delivery of advanced therapy in neuromuscular disorder over the last few years. So I just wanted to mention that I work as part of the John Walton Muscular Dystrophy Research Center, and we are based in Newcastle within the International Center for Life, so just next to the station, although we deliver our activity in cross collaboration with the university and the Newcastle Trust. These are my disclosure. And what I would like to focus today is really to give a little bit of an introduction about the John Walton Muscular Dystrophy Research Center and the activity that we run at the center. Just a very quick introduction to what are the neuromuscular disorders, just to give the context of a gene therapy or advanced therapy approach for this group of rare diseases. I also want to share the experience that we have in terms of delivering advanced therapy clinical trial here as part of the center. But what I would like really to focus the talk today is about what have we learned from this experience and which initiative we have initiated or collaborate on as the John Walton Muscular Dystrophy Research Center to really implement and facilitate the delivery of gene therapy in a clinical trial setting and potentially in a licensed product setting. I also want to point out what I think that are the key factors that has contributed to the successful of the delivery of gene therapy based on our experience, and have some final remarks. So the John Walton Muscular Dystrophy Research Center, as I mentioned, is based at Center for Life, and is a center that has as a mission the aim to perform world-class translational research to bring diagnosis, care, and therapy to people with rare neuromuscular diseases. The way that we are organized, we have 4 strands one focused on clinical care and diagnostic, one on lab research, one on clinical research, and one on networking. And currently, I am leading the clinical research strand as part of the team. But one of the strengths of the team is that these 4 strands closely collaborate to really bring care, diagnosis, care, and therapy to patient from the drug development process to the translational research and clinical trial, but then the implementation of any clinical research activity into the diagnostic in close collaboration with the national and international networking. Below is the picture of the PI of the center with Professor Straub, that is leading and the director of the center, Dr. Chiara Marini Bettolo, that lead the clinical care and diagnostic strand, Professor Diaz Manera, that lead the lab research, Professor Georgia Tasca, that joined recently our team, involved both in the clinical research, clinical and lab research, myself, and Emma Heslop, that lead the working team. This is what we really, in terms of translational research and the clinical research activity that are run in the John Walton Muscle Dystrophy Research Center, are really well summarized, I think, in these slides that show our clinical trial activity since we started, let's say, in 2014, but we started before then. But in 2014, we have already a quite good portfolio in terms of clinical trial in different neuromuscular diseases, highlighted in blue in Duchenne muscular dystrophy and in other diseases in other colors. And we were always been involved in both commercial and non-commercial clinical trial, interventional and natural history observational clinical trial. And what we've shown is how our clinical trial activity has really built up over the year, with a small impact over the COVID in 2020-2021, but a very good pipeline and incremental number of clinical trials that are run. And this slide really want to highlight not only how much activity we are running ahead in Newcastle and the critical role of Newcastle as leading center for translational research in neuromuscular diseases, but also highlight how the neuromuscular disease field is really pioneering the development of new drug, including advanced therapy over the last 10 years. When we talk about neuromuscular disorders, I think that it needed just a very brief introduction to say about which kind of diseases we treat and we are involved with are diseases that affect the muscle, but can be either from the motor neuron involvement in diseases like spinal muscular atrophy, from the neuromuscular junction with congenital myasthenia gravis, or primarily diseases of the muscle, including muscular dystrophy and myopathies. The common factor is all of the diseases present clinically with a progressive deterioration of the muscles that clinically present with progressive muscle weakness and wasting. But in terms of the clinical phenotype, there is a huge variety of diseases that are under the umbrella of neuromuscular diseases. And I think that what I want to focus is that within our team, we treat pediatric diseases as well as adult onset diseases, severely progressive or less severely progressive. And this has implication when we think about the development of new drugs and how we can really optimize the delivery of new intervention, new drug and advanced therapies. But obviously, I think that this very strength and of the neuromuscular diseases, and has been highlighted over the last few years, when we have the first 2 gene therapy approach that have been licensed and are currently available to patients. In 2021, NICE approved the first life-changing gene therapy intervention for spinal muscular atrophy type 1. The treatment is currently available, and there are patients that are nationally treated and monitored also here in Newcastle. And it's really life-changing because for the nature of a spinal muscular atrophy, early intervention has resulted to change the life of a disease that was an early onset disease with a life expectancy of less than 2 years to the disease that is now associated with a much longer life expectancy. And actually, we do not still know how long as it prolonged the life expectancy, but children that were not able to sit independently are now able to hold the monkey bar. So it's really make a huge difference in terms of treatment opportunity. And just very recently, in June this year, the first gene therapy treatment has been approved for Duchenne muscular dystrophy in the United States, and we are waiting from the regulatory opinion in Europe and in the UK based on the result of a recent clinical trial in the upcoming months. So it's a very exciting time in terms of treatment opportunity and advanced therapy in the neuromuscular field. And Newcastle has played a huge contribution to this drug development. We delivered the first advanced therapy clinical trial in 2019 in spinal muscular atrophy. It is the gene therapy that is currently commercially available and licensed also in the UK, and is part of the routine treatment for patients with SMA type 1. In 2021, we delivered the first gene therapy trials in the UK, and Newcastle led the clinical trial sponsored by Pfizer that is still ongoing, and we recruited the first patient in a Duchenne clinical trial gene therapy here in Newcastle back in May 2021. In 2022, we continue our experience in Duchenne muscular dystrophy and took part in another clinical trial sponsored by Sarepta in young children with DMD. And this is the compound that has been recently approved by the FDA and is currently under review based on the recent result of a phase 3 study where Newcastle contributed with a patient. But also in 2022, we initiated the first clinical trial with the gene therapy in an adult onset and in adults with neuromuscular diseases, that is Pompe disease, sponsored by Astellas. And then I think that this is, again, a new experience for the neuromuscular team and for Newcastle to deliver the first gene therapy in an adult population, which obviously has other implications and concerns. The experience continued in 2023. We have delivered the first gene therapy trials in another adult onset limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, R9, sponsored by Atamayo. And in the pipeline, we have already scheduled 2 new clinical trials, one in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. One was sponsored by Genethon in a collaboration with France, Israel, and US, and one sponsored by Sarepta in a non-ambulatory and adult population with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So we are currently running 5 gene therapy, advanced therapy clinical trials in Newcastle, and more are in the pipeline. Talking a little bit about our experience in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, we have or are running 2 phase 3 clinical trials, one sponsored by Pfizer and one sponsored by Sarepta. I'm very proud to say that and we enrolled the first patient in the Pfizer clinical trial in the UK in May 2021, and we are currently the higher recruiter site in the UK. The study is ongoing, has completed recruitment, and patients are currently receiving the gene therapy and continue the monitoring. The second clinical trial was sponsored by Sarepta. We contributed with 1 participant here in Newcastle, with a total recruitment target in the UK of 3 participants. These studies are very similar, target a patient that are relatively young, between the age of 4 and 7 years old. And the study design, and just to highlight the complexity of these studies, where have still a placebo-controlled study design, where the patient receive either gene therapy or placebo, and are monitored for 1 year. And after 1 year, the patient that receive gene therapy are treated with placebo, and the patient that receive placebo are treated with gene therapy. I think this has really implication in terms of the complexity and the consideration in terms of, for example, immunosuppression and other intervention in such a complex study design. but also highlight how gene therapy are a big commitment for the community, for the patient community and for the clinician community in terms of follow-up, because the duration of the monitoring is up to 4 years, with the plan of extension study to monitor patients up to 15 years. As I mentioned, the Sarepta study has led to the recent approval of the compound investigated in the study also run here in Newcastle in the United States for a subpopulation. I just wanted to mention, and we'll discuss this also later, that the FDA approval of the first gene therapy for Duchenne muscular dystrophy was based on the successful result in terms of a biomarker, that is the dystrophin expression. This is a criteria, so the FDA has accepted also in previous clinical trial a surrogate endpoint for the approval of a advanced therapy or innovative drug, while the US, the EMA, so Europe and MHRA are waiting for the clinical result of the phase 3 study, which we contributed to in order to make the decision about the approval process. Plan and pipeline for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. We are already committed to deliver a phase 1 to 2 to 3 study in sponsored by Genethon in a slightly older population compared to one investigating the Pfizer and Sarepta study, including patients between the age of 6 and 10. We are currently taking part in the natural history study, where patients are enrolled and monitored for a minimum of 6 months before entering the gene therapy trial. And I'm very excited to say that we have also been selected as a site to contribute to another clinical trial sponsored by Sarepta with the same compound that has been already investigated in the young population, but this would be the first gene therapy trial involving non-ambulatory and adult patients with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And it's very important because this is a population that has been neglected by clinical trial for many, many years, and therefore it's very exciting to be part of this hopefully promising approach. As I mentioned, I cannot not highlight also our role in the delivery of a phase 1 to 2 study sponsored by Estella in a completely different muscular dystrophy, that is a Pompe disease, which is a metabolic disease. We were the first, we recruited the first patient in Europe in this study. Is also highlighting the role of Newcastle in advanced therapy and in neuromuscular diseases, being the only site outside the UK that has been selected to deliver the study. I highlight this because I also have some implications thinking about the delivery of advanced therapy in different diseases and in different populations, and how this can have an impact on the expectation or on the study design. But as I mentioned, I really want to focus about lesson learned. And I think the first point that I want to highlight is managing expectation. First of all, the concept of gene therapy is a very simple concept, but very difficult to transmit, to pass to people. So the concept of gene therapy is obviously to say that we have an abnormal gene that is the cause of the disease. And the concept is just that we explain to patients is the introduction of a healthy gene into the system, and therefore the production or the complete correction of the faulty gene that is cause of the disease. But we well know that this is much more complex depending on the diseases. And I will mention one of the complexities specifically for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, but is transmitting a very simple complex, and in the complexity of actually behind gene therapy is very difficult. But for the, let's say, non-expert and for the patient community is a very simple concept that is fixing the problem. Also, is just if you think about the approach of gene therapy, when we talk about rare genetic neuromuscular diseases, there is a high expectation just determined by the fact that we correct the genetic cause of the disease. And changing the understanding of what does it mean and the fact that it might not still represent a cure can be difficult. There is another issue that we face when we started gene therapy in Duchenne muscular dystrophy and Pompe disease, and probably was the great experience and the positive experience with the spinal muscular atrophy. So if we talk about not only the patient community, but also the clinician community, there was an understanding that the gene therapy could really represent a cure and make a dramatic change in the natural course of the disease. This was a successful story in spinal muscular atrophy. But we well know that other diseases such as Duchenne muscular dystrophy and Pompe disease or limb-girdle muscular dystrophy are much more complex for different reasons. And this was an initial disappointment when the first study results were presented. These are the results that were submitted as part of the approval from the FDA, showing that actually there was no significant difference in terms of a functional outcome up to 1 year in the population treated with placebo compared to the population treated with gene therapy. And the difference in the effect of the gene therapy was only obvious in the younger population, the 4 to 5 year old, highlighting that maybe the great successful story of SMA might not apply to all diseases treated with gene therapy, but it does not necessarily mean that gene therapy does not work. It's just managing that expectation. Different reason behind that. The first of all probably is that in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, due to the nature of the gene therapy and the use of AAV, we are not able to actually carry the full length of the dystrophin gene and therefore completely correct the mutation, but we use a shorter version of the gene, leading to a shorter version of the protein. And so intrinsically, gene therapy approaches in Duchenne muscular dystrophy will never represent a cure. And the second thing that we need to take into account, and has been a learning lesson, is really the importance of the role of the disease, but also of the target. In SMA so spinal muscular atrophy, the target organ are the motor neuron. The motor neuron are a completely different organ compared to the muscle, which is the target for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, Pompe disease, or limb-girdle. For different reasons. First of all, we always need to remember that the muscle is the a big component of our body composition, and therefore reaching such a huge tissue might be difficult, but also is a tissue that go through continuous regeneration, degeneration and regeneration. So one of the issues that we lesson learn from the experience in gene therapy in muscular dystrophy is really thinking about the durability of the effect of gene therapy in skeletal muscles. It's understandable that the muscle is, as I mentioned, is a tissue that go into continuous cycle of degeneration and regeneration. And when we think about gene therapy or advanced therapy using AAV, so antisense adeno-associated virus, that do not necessarily, that do not integrate in the DNA and therefore do not duplicate on the cell's regeneration, raised an issues about what will happen after the cycle of degeneration and regeneration. Therefore, the new cells will not include the new microdystrophin gene. So how long will really be the effect of gene therapy in muscular diseases? But also another problem that when we think about the durability, affecting the durability of gene therapy, is about how can we make sure that we do not lose the non-integrated vector following the muscle growth. So we treat children and we always grow, and the muscle grow and continue to regenerate. So there is a dilution effect that would not have been expected in spinal muscular atrophy, but it's definitely something that we need to predict in muscle diseases. The other lesson learned is regarding the complexity of the disease itself. So as I mentioned, Duchenne muscular dystrophy or muscular dystrophy are progressive diseases. So far, there's always been the understanding that when we think about treatment in a degenerative disease and progressive disease, early intervention will result in better clinical outcomes. And then has been the approach for all interventional clinical trial in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. But thinking about what I just mentioned in terms of the potential durability of gene therapy muscle and the potential dilution effect with growth, do we really know what is the best time to treat patient with gene therapy? Is the earliest the better? Is early when the muscle is better preserved the best time because we want to maintain what is there? Or do we actually need to postpone the intervention to avoid the dilution effect due to the regeneration and due to the growth of the muscle? And I think that this is something that we still do not have an answer, and we are just becoming more conscious about the importance to monitor this. The current clinical trial usually just do not monitor really the duration of the effect on a muscle pathology, but only on clinical. And this is something that we need to explore further. But also, if you think about different diseases and not Duchenne muscular dystrophy, so not necessarily the children, but where is the best time to treat in diseases such as Pompe disease, when there is a huge variability in the age of onset and in the severity of the disease? Is it ethical to treat children, to treat a patient that do not show any symptoms when we do not know when they will show these symptoms? When is the right time to treat the early signs? We know that at that point the pathology is already existing, but how early and how ethical is this? These are all questions that I think will be addressed in the hopefully near future. The other lesson that I want to highlight is the complexity of the study design. I hope that I already passed the fact that we have a quite extensive experience in the delivery of clinical trial in rare neuromuscular diseases, and we are, let's say, used to complex study design. But gene therapy brings this to a different level. It's not simply the length of the assessment and the duration of the appointment, but there are also other complexities that have not been faced previously. One is consideration about the viral shedding, and this has been a major issue and a learning process in terms of understanding what are the potential implications for other family members and for the general community. These are implications, for example, if you think about siblings. So if we treat one patient with gene therapy, potentially the family is exposed to viral shedding, and therefore this will make them not eligible to receive gene therapy in the future. How can we control this? But also, what are the implications of gene therapy using AAV vector for the community if this AAV vector is potentially disseminated in community, thinking about, for example, babies using nappies and where the nappies is through away. But also we have learned that this study, for the safety perspective, and because it's obviously are the first clinical trial using gene therapy in complex diseases, often required overnight stay. And this is something that needs to be considered again for the potential viral shedding within the hospital and the need of isolating the patient during the administration, but also quite often gene therapy for using AAV vector will require an immunosuppression. Therefore, what are the implications of keeping a patient immunosuppressed in the hospital? What are the considerations that need to be taken into account? There are frequency blood samples that need to be collected, which can be tricky, especially when we think about young children or babies. But also the requirement, for example, for some specific intervention in terms of potential adverse event. And one of the first example is the potential risk of complement activation that has been reported in AAV in gene therapy trials with using AAV, and the requirement of eculizumab. Which trusts are able to deliver such complex study will really determine the ability of nationally delivered large-scale gene therapy trials. But what I think also in consideration is key factor that I think play a critical role in the successful delivery of gene therapy trial. First of all, I cannot emphasize enough the requirement and the need of a multidisciplinary approach and a multidisciplinary engagement. So when we start first to be involved in the first gene therapy trial in Duchenne muscular dystrophy back in 2021, we realized about the potential complexity of expected and unexpected adverse event. Gene therapy is not something that can be delivered by a isolated, although highly specialized service, such as the neuromuscular team, but really need the involvement of a wider commitment from the trust and specialists that might need to be brought into delivery of gene therapy, especially in the potential event of an adverse event. So we established the first gene therapy safety task force in Newcastle within our trust. This is a multidisciplinary team of clinicians who have the relevant expertise and have expressed a specific interest to be involved in implementing the delivery of gene therapy within the trust. They really act as an advisory safety board for the assessment and the management of adverse events within the trust, are a point of contact for emergency admission and intervention, and at the moment we have established an adult and pediatric safety task force that has supported our advanced therapy portfolio. The gene therapy task force include obviously the PI involved in the delivery of the clinical trial, but as I mentioned, a list of specialists, including respiratory consultant, cardiologist, immunologist, hematologist, nephrologist, gastroenterology, but also ICU clinician, pharmacist, and research nurse, and really to bring a multidisciplinary approach to support the delivery of gene therapy trial, but potentially also of licensed drug. We have an introductory meeting with the safety task force to present the study and current preclinical and clinical evidences. We meet before treating the patient to introduce the patient and agree the plan. We have a regular meeting with the safety task force post dosing, and this can be an online meeting or email contacts, and we provide regular updates every 3 to 6 months about the status of the study and any emerging evidences. And it's important that these regular updates are open to both the pediatric and adult task force to share that experience and to really bring more expertise and experience in the delivery of gene therapy and potential adverse event management. The second key factor from my point of view is really the communication. And this is really thinking about international and cross-study collaboration. I have a great example for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. We were not leading that as a John Walton Muscular Dystrophy Research Center, although we were involved in the general discussion. But as part of the gene therapy programs in Duchenne muscular dystrophy across different companies, over the last 2 years, there was emerging evidences of some side effects, specifically regarding the potential risk of cardiomyositis and myositis, which was observed in a different gene therapy clinical trial. The people involved in the delivery of this clinical trial, on the other hand, were very well connected and managed in a way to put together the 4 sponsors that at that time involved in the delivery of gene therapy in Duchenne muscular dystrophy in a collaborative working group to try to identify potential risk factors to prevent these serious adverse events. So all the sponsors agreed to collaborate on this project. Was led by academic facilitators, that is Professor Montoni and Professor Bonneman, Professor Montoni in Gauche, and included an expert panel, international panel. And this really led to understand that there was a potential correlation between the emerging safety profile of gene therapy, increased risk of developing cardiomyositis, and specific genotypes. And this was related to the fact that all the company developing gene therapy, although they use a slightly different construct in terms of the microdystrophin, they all have in common some area. And this, I think that without going into the details, the specificity of the scientific background related to these side effects, I think that was important about how crucial the international collaboration and the intention to share information between academics, clinicians involved in the clinical trial, and pharmaceutical company has really led to an optimization of the clinical trial design and secures safety. But also want to mention the importance of collaboration and coordination. Here is a key role that Newcastle has played in order to develop the infrastructure to guarantee an optimization of delivery of gene therapy trials in the United Kingdom. Some of you might be aware this was a press release from Newcastle Trust, but also Newcastle University, to highlight how Newcastle so the John Walton Muscular Dystrophy Research Centre doses the first patient in the UK in the Sarepta gene therapy trial in the summer last year. And this was a patient from Glasgow, from not known to our service, and not follow up in a center that was taking part in gene therapy trial. So the enrollment of this patient was really made possible through an initiative that was led by the John Walton Muscular Dystrophy Research Centre in collaboration with the Duchenne UK, that is a patient organization, but also with the clinical and clinical trial sites in the UK, that is the Central Recruitment Database. This is a national database that include information from children and adults with Duchenne muscular dystrophy who have a specifically interest in participating in research. The registration is led by the patient or by the parents. They provide information about their their genetic diagnosis, their disease status, and their interest in taking part in specific gene therapy, but also information about how far they are willing to travel, and more importantly, the patient agree for the clinical trial site to get in touch with them, as well as get in touch with their clinical site, so regular care site, to verify eligibility before proceeding for screening. The clinical trial sites, so all clinical sites that deliver clinical trial in Duchenne muscular dystrophy in the UK, has agreed to use the central recruitment database to identify patients potentially eligible for clinical trial. So they can contact the central recruitment database, identify potentially eligible patient, get in touch with their care clinician to verify eligibility before contacting the patient and potentially screen. And this is initiative really based on a strong collaboration between sites that deliver clinical trial and sites that deliver clinical care and the patient community. And this has really allowed in the UK has been a life-changing for the patient, because patients who are not regularly followed up in centers that participate in clinical trial are now given the possibility to take part in research, which was highlighted as a key point for the patient community. But also in the example that I showed before in the Sarepta clinical trial, also allowed a clinical trial site to identify a potentially eligible patient in a very time manner and efficient way. You need to consider for the Sarepta clinical trial, we had 1 month to recruit patients, and we were able to identify nationally 3 patients, all through the central recruitment database. But we also have developed within the UK, and the central recruitment database is an example of them, is the DMD Hub, which is a clinical trial accelerator network for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Is a strong collaboration among clinical sites that deliver clinical trials in the UK. Is led by Newcastle University, again in collaboration with the patient organization Duchenne UK, and coordinate the clinical trial activity across the country. Is the one-stop contact for industry that are interested in delivering trials, including gene therapy in the UK, but are also an opportunity to share knowledge and expertise among sites to facilitate the delivery of research nationally. The last factor that I want to mention is really the education. Our activities really highlight the importance to educate the general community around gene therapy. We probably are all aware that gene therapy is becoming a much more a dominant feature in clinical, in translational research, but with the potential to have approved gene therapy and advanced therapy approach approved and licensed in the near future in neuromuscular diseases as well in other conditions. It's therefore critical that we inform the patient community and educate the patient community about the clinical trial requirement commitment, but also the safety and efficacy evidence that we have in gene therapy and what we do not know and how we are aiming to collect this. But also is the general clinician community, and we are talking about specialist services, but also secondary cares or care sites, to try really to understand, to managing expectation, to educate about the safety profile and efficacy profile of gene therapy and the upcoming evidences. For gene therapy is even more critical than other treatment to really monitor long-term safety and efficacy. And this is only possible if we share the information and allow the broader clinical community to be able to do that. All our experience and lesson learned and key successful factors are really probably summarized in the white paper that we have very recently, just a few weeks ago, published on the evaluation of gene therapy patient referral pathways in the UK. This white paper has now been published and is publicly available. It's been developed in collaboration between the John Walton Muscular Dystrophy Research Center, the DMD Hub, the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult, and the Northern Alliance Advanced Therapy Treatment Center. And it's really aimed to set some recommendation to try to improve, but also standardize the delivery of gene therapy on a national level, but also to establish a referral pathway for patients, both for clinical trial and for licensed product. The white paper is really divided in two parts, one focusing on clinical trial and one focusing on licensed product, and highlight what I already mentioned in terms of educational need, infrastructure needs, consideration about how to manage expectation, and emphasize the role of the central recruitment database model as a potential model to be used as an example to guarantee or to support a fair and equitable access to gene therapy trial and gene therapy product. He's also highlighted the importance and the need from NHS England to support a multidisciplinary approach when considering clinical trial site as well as site to deliver licensed product, and the importance to have a national and geographical distribution of this center to again support equitable access. So in summary, what I think that I want to really highlight and the take-home messages from today is the fact that it's definitely an exciting time for the neuromuscular diseases, with more advanced therapy facing and moving into clinical trial setting, and the first few going through the regulatory approval process, with the possibility to have more licensed advanced therapy available in the upcoming years. The John Walton Muscular Dystrophy Research Center has an established experience in deliver advanced therapy trial, and Israel has really contributed to the setup of infrastructure that could facilitate both the clinical trials as well as the licensed drug delivery. What is crucial is that you definitely need, for advanced therapy delivery, you definitely need a well-motivated specialist and a experienced centers, but it's critical the engagement with a multidisciplinary team. These apply to gene therapy as well as licensed project. It's been highlighted also by other centers, but it's only with the commitment of the full trust that we can successfully deliver advanced therapy. Teamwork and collaboration are keys, and this is coming from the team itself for the setup and the delivery to a much broader collaboration to ensure the equitable access, to ensure broad communication, and to ensure safety of the patient. And this is really the open communication, emerging safety concern is absolutely critical. And it's important to share experience and to share knowledge, not only across the same disease area, but also across different disease areas that are all facing and started to deliver advanced therapies in clinical or clinical trial setting. The expectation from the patient community as well as from the clinician community need to be adequately managed. We've run a survey recently in collaboration with patient organization about what the patient community as well as the clinician community know about gene therapy. And there are clear gaps in both communities that need to be fixed in the near future. But it's also important that access to clinical trial licensed drug is equitable and fair. And this is a thing that is critical. Some of the work has been already done, but require much more work to guarantee the safety, but also to avoid that advanced therapy are only offered to the well-educated and well-informed family, but is broader across the country. And with this, I really need to say a huge thank you, because all the activities that we run at the John Walton Muscular Dystrophy Research Center would not be possible without the very extensive and experienced team from the clinical research fellows, specialist doctor that help us to deliver the study, from the clinical trial coordinator team, without whom we will not be able to do any of this activity, the research nurses at the CRF that supported the delivery of our study, and in general, all the staff at the clinical research facility, the staff at the Greenwood Children's Hospital that support us in the delivery of the pediatric gene therapy, the DMD hub team, and obviously the patient and their family that has shown a huge commitment to really support the learning lesson from advanced therapy clinical trial. And thank you all for listening, and I think that we are now open for questions.